To kick off our discussion of the Puranas this week, we are going to engage with the question, very simply put, why is dating so difficult? From a historical perspective, assigning a date is rather difficult. As a reminder, the Puranas are thought to have been written down very much like other Indian texts and South Asian texts, based upon a collection of oral traditions. They come after the Mahabharata and after the Ramayana, but are composed probably in this big range of time between 200 and 1000 of the Common Era. The term Puranas comes from the Sanskrit Purana, literally meaning ancient or former or formerly before. Vyasa, the narrator of the Mahabharata, is hagiographically credited as the compiler of the Puranas. So what this means is he's venerated as the compiler, although that may not be historically true according to most visions. The ancient tradition suggests that originally there was but one Purana text, and what we have are expanded versions and outgrowths of that text. The Vishnu Purana mentions that Vyasa entrusted his Purana Samhita to his disciples, especially Lomaharshana, who in turn imparted it to his disciples, three of whom compiled their own Samhitas. So Lomaharshana was one of the principal disciples of Vyasa. He was the father of Sutta Ugrashrava, who narrated the Mahabharata to Shanaka and other rishis. Lomaharshana is not just the father of this narrator of the Mahabharata. He is a member of the court of Yudhishthira. Lomaharshana was also one of the 5 disciples, the other 4 being Paila, Vaishampayana, Jamini, and Sumantu. These 5 disciples of Vyasa are taught the Purana, or the various Puranas, and then they expound upon them. So there's this understanding that these 5 disciples are credited with teaching each text, but that first one, the Vishnu Purana, is credited to Lomaharshana. The term Purana does appear in Vedic texts. For example, the Atharvaveda mentions the term Purana in the singular. The Rig and Saman verses, the Chandras, the Purana, along with the Yujus, or the Yajus formula, all sprang from the remainder of the sacrificial food, as also the gods, the Devas, that resort to heaven. He changed his place and went to the great direction, and the Itihasa and Purana Gathas verses in praise of heroes followed in going over. In other words, there is some understanding that during the Vedic period there is some type of text like the Puranas, but this notion of the Puranas as a collection of texts attributed to Vyasa only grows over time. One of the preeminent Chicago School scholars of South Asia, Wendy Doniger, has dated various elements of the Puranas to distinct periods, and she's developed a system for this based off of references in the text and other historical documents. She dates the Markandeya Purana to 1250, with one portion dated as a later addendum to about 550 CE. You could think of this as how the Harivamsa is added onto the Mahabharata later. So there's a later section to that one that's added on centuries afterwards. Then you have the Matsya Purana, which is 250 to 500, the Bayu Purana, which is around 350, the Harivamsa and Vishnu Purana, which is around 450. Then you have the Brahmanda Purana, that's 350 to 950. That's a vast period of time. Then the Vamana Purana, 450 to 900, the Kurma Purana, 550 to 850, and then the Linga Purana 600 to 1000. She discusses the subject of the Puranas focusing on the particular relationship between the great Puranas of the Sanskrit tradition and the many other sorts of Puranas, the lesser Puranas. The Puranas are an example of collections of stories dealing with all aspects of myths and legends, origins of gods and ritual and notions of science and cosmography and cosmology and cosmogony, as also history, and the authors of these various texts are clearly superb storytellers because they are excellent stories. There are also newly discovered Purana manuscripts from the classical period that have attracted much scholarly attention of late. Although they have expanded our understandings of the Puranas, some of the claims are contested. They nonetheless demonstrate the Puranic literature went through slow redaction, and the text was probably expounded upon over time, leading to the loss of some parts, as well as sometimes even sudden deletion of numerous chapters and replacement with new content to an extent that currently circulating Puranas, the way that we have them passed down, are entirely different from those that existed before the 11th century, or even before the 16th century. For example, a newly discovered palm leaf manuscript of the Skanda Purana, Nepal, has been dated to be from about 810 of the Common Era, but it is entirely different from versions of the Skanda Purana that have been circulating in South Asia since the colonial era. Further discoveries of 4 more manuscripts, each different, suggest that the document has gone through major redactions twice, first likely before the 12th century, and then a second very large change seems to have occurred during the 15th and 16th centuries, and we're not necessarily sure about the reason for these major changes. The different versions of the manuscript of the Skanda Purana suggest that there have been also minor redactions, interpolations, and perhaps deletion, little editorial flair here and there over time. And sometimes maybe for political reasons, sometimes not. It's hard for us to tell. So to open up the discussion this week, let's just focus on the problem of why dating is so difficult in the case of the Skanda Purana specifically, but also the Puranas broadly construed. What factors might be at play here? Go ahead and make a quick post and let's get the juices flowing.